digitization, allowed us to do virtual product modeling and digital mock-up, and then change the way manufacturing is done, and now it's transforming the way service information is delivered. I talked about digitization as being one of the key enablers, along with the internet and cheap airplane travel and so forth, for globalization, and that led to design anywhere, build anywhere types of strategies. That globalization then brought on this problem or challenge, let's say, of regulation. So many different regulations in so many different countries that impact the products you develop, and if you don't develop mindful of those regulations, you won't be selling those products in those countries. The second thing that globalization brought on was, you could say fragmentation of demand, but I use the word personalization. And I define that first at the level of regionalization, and then secondarily at the level of personalization. And I said that the way you truly get to markets of one, completely individual products, is you go the last mile in software. And then I said that brought up the next force, which is software eating the world, or software-intensive products, or I'm not sure we can coin the term softwareization. It would work better, but that one's a mouthful. But anyway, just the trend in general for software, changing the way you interact with products, changing the functionality of those products, changing the ability of those products to collect usage information, diagnostic information, service history, and so forth. And then I said, once you have software and a CPU, why don't you put an IP address on it and connect it to the Internet of Things, and now you have connected products with this umbilical cord, and that led to the final transformative force, which is servitization, which is companies realizing that, it's a very interesting business model to think about not just having a transaction whereby you sell something, but having an ongoing relationship with your customer, where you have sort of a subscription. Maybe you sell the product and there's subscriptions with it. Maybe over time the product itself becomes more of a subscription and an ongoing value delivery vehicle. So anyway, that was the 7 forces. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about our strategy. It's somewhat obvious, but obviously CAD, PTC's original business, got us into the digitization world. We saw, really with Windchill and the internet, the ability to solve this globalization problem. So Windchill PLM became our response to globalization. It matured over time and became our response also to personalization. We have quite sophisticated infrastructure in Windchill to manage both regional and personal variability. It became our answer to regulation. We have quite a sophisticated solution for regulatory management of REACH and ROSE and conflict minerals and so forth in our Windchill product analytics solution. We said some time ago already, even before this vision was so clear that software was eating the world, and we went out and made a critical acquisition a couple years ago of this company, MKS, and their integrity product, and really acquired the leading set of software tooling for the software that goes into products. And then that, of course, connects all to our SLM strategy, which picks up that information, both from engineering and coming back from the product, and melds that together and says, what do I need to do to service this thing? What parts do I need? What information do I need? When I get my truck right now, where should I go and what should I do and what should I bring with me? So I think that, it's perhaps been a little bit of serendipity and a lot of good instincts and so forth, but right now the vision seems clearer than ever to us. I had a shareholder ask me a month or so ago, he said, why, I understand CAD and PLM, I don't understand ALM and SLM. How are these things connected together? And I told him basically just the little 2-minute story I told you. I said, you can shoot an arrow right through all of these things. They're perfectly aligned. And it makes complete sense that a company like PTC in this day and age would have that line up with technology. Obviously, there's a few things we'd like to add to it, both organically or things we might acquire. But, we're pretty proud of what we have, and we think it's different. Our story is different than the story Siemens is telling. It's different than the story Dassault's telling. It's different than SAP or Oracle or anybody else. And we like that. And we think that a lot of our customers like it too. Okay, so on the first question, the economics of the manufacturing industry, and unfortunately, as the CEO of a public company in this market, I have a PhD in that now, which I never wanted to have. But, essentially what's happening is if you divide the world into US, Europe, Japan, and back rim/China, as we do, what you would see is that the situation in Japan is pretty bleak, that the manufacturing industry is declining, that the average customer has less revenue than they did last year. If you look at Europe, that's also true. that the average customer in Europe has less revenue than they did last year. Not all of them, but on average they do. So there's something around a 3-4% decline in Japan, something around a 3-4% decline in Europe. If you come to the US, there's a bit of growth, maybe a 2% growth rate, but that's down. You know, it had picked up after 2009, and then it settled down and actually went down near to zero and then came back up, and now it's seemingly headed back down again. So the US manufacturing recovery has stumbled a bit. The last couple of months have been more negative than positive. And then China's a good story. You know, the Chinese manufacturing economy is growing at about a 10% rate. So if you take all of that and weight it per PTC's business, we're talking about a roughly flat economy. Keeping in mind that 85% of our revenue comes from Europe, US, and Japan. And that combination would be in slight decline when put together. So it's a tough economy out there. Now, the last couple of months seem to have bottomed out, particularly in Europe and Japan. So while the absolute number in Europe and Japan is bad, the improvement trend is good, and it's headed back up towards growth. And I'm hopeful in the US, you know, that once we get through the shock wave of what's the word, sequestration, thank you, and the new taxes and, you know, all the craziness that happened there for a couple months, that'll improve too. So I think most people think the economy in the back half of 2013 going into 2014 will improve in all of those geographies. I mean, most of the models we look at suggest global improvement, but, you know, we feel like we better wait and see if that actually happens before we count on it. So it's been it's a tough year. You know, PTC doesn't have the growth we want to have, neither does Dassault, neither does Autodesk. You know, the entire tech industry is in low single-digit growth rates right now, you know, where we'd like to be in double-digit growth rates. So it's a tough time, but we PTC are doing pretty well. You know, we're going to have a good year here. You know, we're forecasting overall growth of 4 or 5%. We're forecasting earnings growth of 15 to 20%. So in a tough economy, we'll post a pretty good year.
Yeah, great question, John. And systems engineering is a hot topic with many of our customers. We think that starts with requirements management, which is one of the core competencies of the Integrity product line that we acquired with MKS. That's where most of our customers want to start their improvement in systems engineering processes. There's also a subset of companies that are interested in system modeling, taking a kind of a theoretical, a rational, a UML kind of based approach to system modeling. That's a smaller set of companies today. So today we're doing an integration with the leaders that do that work. But that's part of the decomposition of the system requirements down into the different engineering disciplines. We're well at work and well underway in the integration of Integrity and Windchill together to support those use cases around requirements management, around requirements decomposition into engineering bills and materials. So the integration is coming along nicely, and I think we're skating ahead of our customers in integrating this before they need that functionality. So we think the systems engineering topic overall really ties together a lot of what we're talking about, validation and a quality focus when you think about the, if you will, the ascending leg of the V around verification and validation. We have a lot of capabilities that we think are differentiated there around test planning, test execution, and even on the facets of quality and reliability modeling. So when you take together our focus on global quality, on requirements management, as well as kind of core engineering on both hardware and software, we think our systems engineering story is unparalleled.
Just one other thing I'd like to add to that is the other form of integration. Brian was really talking about technical integration, but the other form is, you know, sort of business integration. And you may know that we kept the MKS Integrity business separate for a while because we said it's a new business. We need to watch it for a while before we sort of integrate it fully, assimilate it, let's say. But starting October 1st of this past year, we assimilated it. And that meant really that we turned loose the cross-selling. The cross-selling had kind of been blocked a little bit prior to that because actually the different sales reps weren't incented to cooperate. But as of October 1st, we jammed that together. And that causes a little bit of pain for a while, but it quickly fills up a pipeline of opportunities, and we're seeing that.
You could argue that technical information and that part of SLM was pretty close to home in terms of having a direct relationship with product development and the reuse of engineering data. But what we realized as we started to develop credibility in that space with the executive running service was that they had a much bigger problem. They had a big problem of disconnected point solutions, homegrown products that weren't working together to support their service business. And so we saw that as a big opportunity because nobody else in the market was really addressing a complete solution to help manage your service business. Now the other thing that we realized was that there were tight connections beyond just reusing CAD data or having an up-to-date view of parts lists and serviceable items. That there was a bigger opportunity that could leverage into the transaction systems. And so when we found Servigistics, we found sort of the other half of the puzzle that we didn't have. Everything that we had was very close to product development and the reuse of engineering content for technical information. Everything they had was more on the transactional side and the operational side. But what we're now finding, and we're talking about it across the street right now with this executive advisory board, is that there is a tremendous amount of leverage, not just in having one solution, but in being able to go from the design of the product to the provisioning of the spare parts strategy to using that information in the optimization of your spare parts and updating the optimization of your spare parts for change. When engineering says, we're thinking about changing this part, the people running the Servigistics parts management solution might like to know that ahead of time. Because what they might say to engineering is, did you know that if you make that change, you're going to spoil $200 million worth of on-hand inventory? And engineering might, knowing that information, say, oh, well, we were actually only trying to solve a small problem, not a $200 million problem. We'll wait a few months so that you can take that inventory position down. So we're finding customers realizing with us a tremendous linkage between these different solutions. Maybe just one last example. Field service is another big area where Servigistics had some success and a great product. What our customers are asking for is please now deliver all of that parts information, those 3D parts catalogs, that technical information through that mobile field service experience that Servigistics developed so that the technicians can even get more productive through one single user interface to the information they need to do their job. So you're right, but I think there's tons of linkages between those operational systems and things we already did.
Yeah, so I wanted to add one piece, which is I'm not sure it's entirely true to characterize Servigistics as transaction. I think part of it is. But the term Servigistics apparently comes from service logistics. I'd actually characterize it as service planning. Sort of like our MPM link software is for manufacturing planning. And there's a process called manufacturing engineering, where you say, well, what will we do in the factory? What resources will we need? What information will need to be created so that the people doing that work know what to do, and so forth. And that's really how PTC came at it. How do you convert an engineering bill of material to a service bill of material? How do you convert engineering information to service instructions? Then we meet Servigistics, and they say, okay, now that you have the service bill of material full of parts, how many of these parts will we need, and where should we store them? What failure modes would happen that would cause demand on these parts, and with what frequency do those failure modes happen, and how much do these parts cost? And there's algorithms to run through around planning. This is the single biggest part of the Servigistics, the single hottest part anyway, of the Servigistics business is really around parts planning. But it's not fundamentally different than MPM. It's SPM, service parts management, or service parts planning, if you want.
We have a new offering for small and medium businesses in the area of PDM, which was the focus of Product Point. That's now called Windchill PDM Essentials. So it is a prepackaged version, if you will, a slimmed down version of Windchill, specific for the needs of CAD data management in small and medium enterprises. Easy to deploy, yet still provides the power and capability of Windchill for CAD data management. So we've really replaced the Product Point offering with a core Windchill offerings, tailored for the needs of that market. We still have integrations between Windchill and SharePoint. A lot of our customers do use SharePoint as portal technology or for some homegrown IT applications. So we have these web parts that share out information that is owned and mastered in Windchill onto SharePoint portals. So the larger user community inside a company can access Windchill information via SharePoint. So that exists and is a pretty popular offering as well.
If you're talking about service lifecycle management, there's a greater willingness. You know, we have a cloud offering there. It's a managed service offering, which Servigistics had when we acquired them. And there's some interest in that. Probably 20% of the customers deploy that. When you move to PLM, you got to push really hard for people that want to put PLM in the cloud. I mean, sorry, Autodesk, it's just hard. And it really is just this fundamental concern that if my data, if my designs were to be compromised, I'm not sure the company would exist in a couple years. So people are very wary of that. Now, I think if you're talking about giving them a single tenant private system and running it privately for them in a managed service environment, like our friends NetIdeas do, that makes more sense. But I just, you know, we feel like there's not a lot of pull for PLM in the cloud, and I don't want to say it'll never happen. Don't suggest I'm saying that. I'm just saying there's huge reluctance amongst the customer base to take what they see as the crown jewels of their company and hand it over to somebody and hope that it's protected. It's just some irrational fear there. We can, actually. One of the elements of our product analytics is carbon footprint, where carbon footprint is a proxy for energy consumption, because it's the consumption of energy that creates the carbon footprint. We actually made a small acquisition 2 years ago, let's say, of a company called Planet Metrics, who had a carbon footprint analytics engine that we've brought into this family we call Windchill Product Analytics. And we're starting to develop a really interesting portfolio of analytic tools. I probably let Brian talk about this since since he owns it. But you know, we had this idea of you know, once you have geometry, you can create a mesh and do so many different, you know, mechanical analyses of it. We had the idea that once you have a bill of material, you ought to be able to perform a reach analysis, a rows analysis, a conflict minerals analysis, a carbon footprint analysis, a price analysis, a weight analysis, you know, preferred supplier analysis, just on and on and on. So we've been building out that portfolio, and you know, one of the pieces we have is, in fact, carbon footprint analytics.
We're actually right on track with our expectations for adoption of Creo. We had stated a goal at the beginning of the year to have about 50% of our base there by the end of this year. And we're on track to do that. This summer and into the fall, we expect quite a few larger customers to be adopting. We're at about 25% now. We'll be at about 50% by the end of the year. You may say, boy, it's been a long time you've been talking about Creo, and 25% isn't a whole lot. But the reality is that it was just last year that we delivered Creo 2.0. It's only been available for about a year now. And Creo 2.0 is really the destination. When we look at our data, our technical support data, for example, this is actually the fastest adopted CAD release we've had in the last decade or so, as long as we've been tracking that metric. Creo 2, right? And so, you know, in general, we feel pretty good about that. The feedback at this event and over the past couple of months as customers are adopting and rolling it out, it's quite positive. You know, people are excited about it. They're seeing the productivity gains. And it is also helping us win new customers. I mean, we are able to go and you know, have a very good conversation with a prospect. The usability of Creo has neutralized some of those ease of use objections that Pro Engineer had that we all knew existed. Creo has really addressed that, and we can set those discussions aside and really have a discussion about the value that this breadth of applications across the spectrum of product development is able to add to customers. So it's been quite helpful.
Could I add that the adoption rate in the SMB segment where we have resellers is much higher. So, you know, the big accounts, the John Deeres, the Volkswagens, the Caterpillars, they're a little more conservative in their planning. But the reseller accounts, which is actually where a lot of the new sales come from too. All new sales are Creo 2 based. And the conversion rate, the upgrade rate, is much higher. In fact, you saw one of the customers, I forget which one it was today, say it's a pretty easy upgrade. And the critical thing, yeah, GKN, the critical thing is full data compatibility. When's the last time you saw that from Dassault?
So on the release front, really what we're doing, Jay, is we're responding to what the customers are telling us. When we announced, for example, the Creo strategy, the customers said, we're excited about it, we want to see it, we're not going to go to Creo 1.0. So that put pressure on us to deliver Creo 2.0 in a pretty short window. It was about 9 months later. This year, customers are saying, okay, we're going to that. So we basically said, okay, we're going to tune ourselves, our marketing message, our tech support, our R&D organization to support them in doing that. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense while they're in the midst of doing that for us to show up with a Creo 3.0 release with a whole bunch of other new things. It's confusing and it's disruptive to them. So that's a lot of what drove us to take that Creo 3 release and to some degree, make it a secondary priority beyond what the market was telling us they were to do. Would I love to have an annual release and something new to tell you every year here? Absolutely. But frankly, the customers can't absorb that quickly enough. On the other hand, waiting 2 full years, that feels like it might be a little too much. So from a desktop tools perspective, I would say that somewhere in the 18 to 22 month range is what feels best to us. And I'm not going to commit to that all the time, but based on what's going on with our technology and adoption, I think that's what you can expect.
On the enterprise side, with Windchill, after a long cycle for the 10.0 release, that was a 27-month cycle. That was really about overhauling the user experience there, and it took us a long time to do that. We also changed the way we developed Windchill to a more agile process, so it took us a while as well. We put it through many iterations to get the user experience right. The 10.1 release was only a 12-month cycle, so we did that intentionally a little bit for the same reason Mike described, that we wanted a .1 release quickly to allow greater adoption of that after a big, semi-disruptive change of overhauling the complete user interface. The 10.2 release will be a little bit longer than that because we're including some additional functionality. It takes a little while to develop. So even on the enterprise side, while the cycle isn't consistent, it's the same answer as Mike, which is it's driven based on customer requirements from both a functionality standpoint and how much they can absorb at once. On the integrity side, it's actually kind of a different story there as well, that we're delivering a constant stream of enhancements into the integrity platform, really on an every 3 to 4 month basis. It's very quick, but very small, digestible improvements on integrity, and that customer base stays up to date quite well, viewed across the whole world. So it's different for different products and different over different times, and I think that's okay. That's part of product planning, is when to release it. I don't think we need to be dogmatic about a fixed time period.
First, let me say, just to go back to the Creo launch, we talked about 4 breakthrough technologies there, right? And we delivered 2 of them in the first release, the AnyMode modeling and the AnyRoll apps. And then in Creo 2, we delivered this AnyBomb assembly idea. And this in Creo 3 is really sort of the completion of delivering those breakthrough technologies. Now, as far as how far we'll go, we want to provide, this is a really big issue, right? You heard GKN talk about it, you hear customers talking about it all the time, we all do. And I don't think that there's, I don't think there's a magic wand that we're going to wave here, but the technology that we're working on here, I think can provide a lot of value to customers in terms of being able to collaborate, and also, I'd like to help them consolidate. Here at this event, I've talked to at least a half a dozen customers who have said, listen, I'm thinking about, getting rid of my SolidWorks, getting rid of my NX, and, moving to Creo. And the problem that they struggle with is it's such it's a big bang approach today, right? I've got to put a lot of money into converting my data. I've got to figure out how to do that. And basically what we're saying here is, listen, do that over time. Stop using those tools, start creating models in Creo, and as you use that legacy data, go ahead and use it. Keep it as a SolidWorks file as long as you want to, and then when you're ready to make changes to it, use Flex modeling or these other tools to make changes to it. We already have technology to support some of the downstream deliverables like drawings, so we want to allow them to bring not only their models, but also their drawings into Creo, and we can show you that if you're interested in seeing that. And the reality is that it will always be a multi-CAD world. So one of the things that we're working on is an ability to push those changes back up. We want to allow you to save a model back in those native formats. And the pricing and the packaging and how all of that stuff will work, we've got some time to figure that out. It's certainly something we'll talk about over the next 9 months or so. But that's absolutely part of our strategy. We see a huge opportunity here as we differentiate ourselves with this app strategy, which we think is a big deal, we want to go out and sell that to customers that have an existing 3D solution, and this is the barrier. You know, this is the main obstacle we've got to get over, and that's why it's such a big priority for us.